Jinsu sat alone in the towering office of his Seoul skyscraper, the city lights reflecting on the glass walls like shards of memory. He stared at the invitation to his wedding lying on the mahogany desk in front of him. It gleamed with gold lettering and pristine calligraphy, but it felt cold in his hands as if it belonged to someone else. He remembered the first time he met Amara in a crowded airport terminal, her laughter cutting through the chaos of passengers, her dark eyes shining with curiosity, and life. He had been on a business trip in Nigeria hoping to finalize a deal that could expand his empire, and there she was carrying a small bag of groceries, looking effortlessly elegant with her natural hair pulled back in a way that made him think of sunlight and freedom. He had bumped into her by accident, spilling coffee on her white shirt, and her eyes had widened, not with anger but with surprise and amusement. He remembered the way she had smiled at him. The first words that had slipped from her lips were a teasing scolding in perfect English, and his heart had caught in a way that no boardroom deal ever could. In the months that followed, Jinsu found himself traveling to Africa more than he traveled to Seoul. Each meeting that was supposed to be about contracts and investments somehow ended with him seeking out Amara in the crowded markets, the quiet cafes, the dusty streets of Lagos. He watched her work tirelessly at a non-profit organization that helped children affected by conflict and poverty, and he admired her resilience, her passion, and the way she never let the world see her weariness. The more he got to know her, the more he realized that this was not a woman who could be tamed or bought with gifts or luxury. She was vibrant, fierce, and untouchable, and yet he found himself drawn into a quiet vulnerability around her that he had never shown anyone. Then came the night that changed everything. Jinsu had invited her to dinner at a small rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. He was nervous because he knew that he could not keep living in the shadows of a love he had hidden behind ambition. He wanted to tell her the truth about his feelings, about how he regretted letting his career pull him away from what truly mattered. Amara had been patient with him in ways that no one else had been patient. She had been willing to wait for the man he could become, not the man the world demanded he be. And that night she laughed and teased and looked at him in a way that made his chest ache with longing. Time passed, and their connection deepened in secret, but the world around them continued its relentless pressure. Jinsu returned to Korea to manage his empire and prepare for the wedding arranged by his family, a union meant to strengthen business ties and social standing. It was a lavish affair with invitations sent to the elite politicians and celebrities, the media eagerly speculating about the merger of two powerful families. But Jinsu could not shake the memory of Amara, her warm hands, her fierce loyalty, her quiet strength. He thought about the little daughter they had together, a child he had never publicly acknowledged, a daughter who carried both their features in her dark eyes and soft hair. Amara, meanwhile, struggled to maintain a semblance of normal life. She had taken a modest apartment overlooking the bustling streets, and every day she woke before dawn to prepare breakfast for their daughter and herself. She juggled her humanitarian work with raising a child in secrecy, always aware that one misstep could bring the media and the world crashing into their lives. She taught her daughter about the beauty of her heritage, the strength of her roots, and the love of a father who was too far away to hold her every night, but whose presence lingered in whispered bedtime stories and old photographs. One evening, Amara received a letter slipped under her door, written in an unfamiliar hand, warning her that someone had discovered her daughter and that her life would not remain private much longer. Her heart pounded in fear. She knew that Jinsu had wealth and influence, but the threats were personal and dangerous. She could not reach him immediately because he was preparing for a wedding that demanded all his attention, and she feared the consequences of involving him too soon. She spent nights pacing the small apartment, thinking of how to protect her child, how to keep the world at bay, how to survive another day in a world that was always watching. Jinsu, on the other hand, could not focus on the wedding plans. He found himself pacing the corridors of his luxurious apartment, thinking of Amara and their child. His mind replayed every laugh, every touch, every moment they had shared. He realized that the life he was building without her felt hollow and meaningless. He began to question the choices he had made, the sacrifices he had accepted in the name of family and ambition. He thought of the wedding hall of flowers, the smiling guests, the cameras flashing, but none of it mattered. He felt a pull so strong that it began to consume him, a desire to undo the mistakes of the past and to stand by the woman who had never left him in spirit, no matter the distance or the years. In his office, Jinsu opened an old leather-bound journal he had kept during his travels in Africa. Memories spilled across the pages. Sketches of streets, faces, moments of laughter, and shared meals. He turned to a page with a small drawing of a girl holding a balloon. He remembered the day he had watched Amara teach their daughter to walk across the courtyard of her small apartment complex. She had held his hand in hers and smiled, saying that the world could not touch them here, and for a moment he had believed it, then the shadows of reality had crept in, and he had returned to Korea leaving them behind. Now the shadows felt longer and heavier, he could no longer ignore the letters, the whispers of threats nor the ache in his chest that demanded he act. He packed a small bag of essentials, a notebook, a photograph of Amara and their daughter, and left the apartment in the middle of the night. Unnoticed by the security staff or the media, he bought a one-way ticket to Africa, a trip that was officially for business, but in truth was for a journey back to the life he had abandoned to the family he had neglected, to the love that had never truly left him. Amara sensed something shifting. As the days passed, she noticed a subtle change in the air, the feeling that someone was near yet unseen. She worried and hoped in equal measure. She prepared her daughter for the possibility of a reunion, telling stories of bravery, love, and the power of forgiveness. She did not know if Jinsu would come back, if he would have the courage to face the dangers and the lies that had built up over the years. She could only wait and pray that the man who had once promised to love her unconditionally would keep that promise now when it mattered more than ever. The night before Jinsu was scheduled to return to Africa, he stood on the balcony of his Seoul apartment, looking out over the city lights, and felt the weight of his decision pressing against his chest. He knew that canceling the wedding would send shockwaves through his family, his business associates, and the media. He knew that he was risking everything he had worked for, yet he also knew that the alternative was to live a life of regret, a life devoid of the warmth of Amara and the laughter of their child. He closed his eyes and imagined the small hand of his daughter in his own, the soft sound of Amara's voice, and felt a determination that he had never felt before. And so part 1 ends with Jinsu boarding the plane under the cover of night, leaving behind the life that had been chosen for him, and stepping into the unknown where danger, love, and redemption awaited him. The suspense, hanging heavy like the night sky over the city as the journey to reclaim his family and his heart began. Jinsu stepped off the plane into the humid African night, the air thick with heat, and the faint scent of the ocean mingling with the city streets. He clutched the photograph of Amara and their daughter tightly in his hand, feeling the pulse of anticipation and fear coursing through him. Every step he took toward the car waiting outside felt heavy, as if the world itself was testing his resolve. He remembered the warnings in the letters Amara had received, the hints of danger lurking in the shadows, and he knew that the reunion he longed for could be more complicated than he had imagined. As the car weaved through the congested streets, Jinsu could not help but notice the vibrancy of the city, the lights, the sounds, and the people moving with purpose and resilience. His heart ached, thinking of the years he had spent away, how many moments he had missed, how many nights he had spent in a sterile apartment far from the warmth of family. He had tried to fill the void with business meetings, power, and prestige, but none of it could compare to the quiet intimacy of holding his daughter in his arms and seeing Amara smile at him with trust and forgiveness. Meanwhile, Amara sensed a shift in the atmosphere as the days stretched on. She noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood, the feeling of being watched, footsteps echoing behind her when she walked home at night, and messages slipped under the door with warnings veiled as casual notes. She knew that Jinsu would come, she hoped he would come, yet fear gnawed at her constantly for the safety of their child. She had prepared hiding places, safe rooms, and a network of friends who could help, but the threats seemed relentless, like a storm always approaching and never breaking. When Jinsu finally arrived at the modest apartment, he felt a mixture of relief and tension. His heart raced as he approached the door, a door that had become the threshold between past mistakes and possible redemption. He knocked lightly and held his breath. Amara opened the door, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, followed by hesitation, as if she had learned to protect herself from hope. He saw their daughter peeking from behind her skirt, eyes wide and uncertain, and in that moment, everything else in the world fell away. The noise, the threats, the wedding, the expectations of society. He knelt slowly and opened his arms, and she ran into him, small arms wrapping tightly around his neck, and he felt a warmth that years of wealth and ambition could never have given him yet. The danger was real and immediate. The stranger who had been sending threats was not far away, someone with knowledge of their movements, their routines, their vulnerabilities. Jinsu could feel the weight of enemies closing in the city. Had become a maze filled with hidden eyes and unseen dangers. Every day they moved cautiously, never staying in one place too long, checking doors, windows, and the streets. He used his resources carefully, hiring discreet protection, avoiding cameras and contacts who might betray them. His every decision was measured, knowing that one misstep could unravel the fragile safety he and Amara had fought to create. The nights were the hardest. Jinsu lay awake, listening to the sounds of the city while Amara slept nearby, their daughter in the middle between them, representing the bond that had endured time, distance, and secrecy. He thought of the wedding he had canceled, the faces of the guests, the media frenzy, and he realized that it was all meaningless compared to this fragile moment of family togetherness, yet he also knew that this sanctuary was temporary, that the threats would not vanish, and that he would have to confront enemies who had powerful influence and motives that reached beyond personal vendetta. Mara watched Jinsu quietly one evening, noticing the lines of worry on his face, the tension in his shoulders, and the way he avoided looking at the world outside the windows. She wanted to trust that they could build a life together, but the past had taught her caution. She spoke softly to him, telling stories of their daughter. The small achievements, the laughter and tears of the day. She reminded him of the love that had never faltered, even in years of separation, and slowly, Jinsu felt the heavy burden of fear ease for a moment, replaced by determination and focus. Days passed in a tense rhythm, moving between safety and exposure. Jinsu investigated who might be behind the threats, tracing the letters, the suspicious phone calls, and the surveillance he had hired discreetly. He discovered a network of people who had once worked with his business empire, now resentful of his decisions and seeking revenge through Amara and their child. He realized that his enemies were cunning, patient, and ruthless, and that protecting his family would require him to make choices that could alienate allies and confront old rivals. One afternoon, as they were walking through a quiet market, the feeling of being followed intensified. Jinsu noticed a shadow lingering behind a stall, someone moving just out of reach of direct sight. He signaled to Amara, who instinctively grabbed their daughter and ducked into a narrow alley. His heart pounded, adrenaline and fear mixing into a cocktail of survival instinct. He moved silently around the corner, catching sight of the figure, someone familiar from his past, someone who had betrayed him once and now returned to finish a debt owed through intimidation. A tense confrontation followed in the maze of alleys, words exchanged, threats, whispered and shouted promises of retribution. Jinsu kept his composure, knowing that any misstep could endanger Amara and their daughter. He watched the figure retreat, finally disappearing into the crowd, yet leaving a lingering sense of danger that would not easily fade. He realized that their lives were entwined not only with love but with a web of enemies' secrets and past mistakes that demanded vigilance, courage, and sacrifices. Night fell over the city. Jinsu and Amara returned to the apartment, exhausted yet bonded by the intensity of the day. They sat together, watching their daughter sleep, feeling the fragile thread of peace that they had earned through endurance and courage. He promised Amara silently that he would not let anyone harm their family, that he would face whatever came next without hesitation or regret. They knew that the journey ahead would be filled with peril, yet the love that had survived distance and betrayal gave them strength and hope. And so part 2 ends with the family bound together in secrecy, navigating threats that lurked in the shadows and enemies who waited patiently, knowing that the past had power over them, but also aware that Jinsu had chosen to risk everything for love, and that no matter the danger, the bond between them was unbreakable and growing stronger with each passing day. The night air was heavy and thick with tension. Jinsu stood by the window of the small apartment, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars in a dark sky. His heart was pounding, not from fear but from the weight of the choices he had to make. Amara sat nearby, their daughter sleeping soundly between them, oblivious to the shadows that lurked just beyond the walls of their temporary sanctuary. Jinsu knew that the threats were far from over, that powerful forces would stop at nothing to manipulate his life and destroy the fragile peace he had fought to create. The next morning, he began to lay out a plan carefully, measuring every risk, every ally, every possibility of betrayal. He contacted trusted confidants from his business empire, people who had always remained loyal quietly and without judgment. He knew that confronting the enemies directly could expose Amara and their daughter, so he needed precision, discretion, and strategy. Each decision was deliberate, every move calculated, like a game of chess where the stakes were love, family, and survival. Amara watched him with a mixture of admiration and worry. She could see the intensity in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened as he considered options and contingencies. She knew he would protect them at any cost, but she also feared the danger that inevitably followed him. She moved closer, placing her hand on his shoulder, silently reminding him that they were not alone, that their love and their daughter gave them a strength that could not be measured in wealth or power. Jinsu looked at her and nodded silently, feeling the surge of determination and courage that had brought him back into their lives. Days passed in a tense rhythm filled with hidden movements and coded messages. Jinsu tracked the person behind the threats, discovering a network of rival business associates and old enemies who had never forgiven his rise to power and sought revenge through fear, intimidation, and manipulation. They had underestimated him. They had thought he would continue to follow the rules of society and family tradition, yet he was no longer a man who could be controlled. His priorities had changed, and he would do whatever it took to protect the family he had abandoned and now reclaimed. The final confrontation came unexpectedly on a rainy evening as Jinsu and Amara walked with their daughter through the narrow streets of the city. He noticed figures following them, shadows moving too deliberately to be coincidence. He guided Amara and their child into a hidden alley, signaling for them to remain silent. His pulse raced, yet he felt calm, his mind focused as he confronted the lead threat, a former associate who had once been trusted, now twisted by greed, resentment, and vengeance. Words were exchanged, heated, urgent promises of consequences for betrayal and loss. Jinsu remained composed, yet the intensity in his eyes spoke of the determination and courage that had carried him through years of distance, regret, and fear. In a tense standoff, the threat recognized that Jinsu was no longer the man to manipulate or intimidate the family he loved. The presence of Amara and their child was enough to shift the balance, the weight of loyalty, courage, and love making it clear that any attempt to harm them would be met with unrelenting resistance. The enemy retreated, finally disappearing into the night, leaving a lingering echo of danger, but also a sense that the battle had been won not through violence but through resolve, strategy, and the undeniable power of a family unit. Back in the safety of their apartment, Jinsu held Amara and their daughter close, feeling the warmth and certainty of what he had fought for. He realized that wealth and power had never been enough, that the life he had almost lived without them would have been hollow and empty. Their daughter stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly, smiled, whispering promises of protection, love, and presence. Amara looked at him with tears in her eyes, feeling a profound sense of relief, gratitude, and renewed trust. She knew that the journey had been perilous, yet they had emerged stronger and closer, bound by trials and love. In the days that followed, Jinsu worked quietly to sever the influence of those who had threatened their lives, ensuring that Amara and their daughter could live with freedom and dignity. He engaged discreetly with legal authorities, friends, and loyal associates to create a safe environment, removing the shadows that had haunted them. The city seemed less threatening somehow, the streets warmer, the air lighter, as if the universe acknowledged their struggle and granted them a fragile peace that they had earned. Jinsu and Amara began to rebuild their lives together, slowly, cautiously, yet with a sense of joy that had been absent for years. They spent time teaching their daughter about love, courage, heritage, and the power of family. They laughed, played, and cherished moments that felt ordinary yet extraordinary. In the aftermath of danger, they knew that the world could still be harsh and unpredictable, but they had found a sanctuary within each other, a bond strengthened by the trials they had survived and the choices they had made. The final days of their journey were quiet and reflective. Jinsu canceled all public appearances, avoided the scrutiny of media, and focused